Okay. Good evening. It's so good to see you all here. See lots of folk from my own congregation, lots of folk from St. Bonaventure, lots of folk who are connected in various ways. It's wonderful to have you all here. The person I'm about to introduce, Bil Lepp, he's won all these storytelling festivals. It's 5 times national winner, something like that. He's also, by the way, hosted a TV show on the History Channel, Man and History. So if you have seen that, it's 4, 5, 7, 8 episodes. And it is definitely worth checking out on the History Channel, Man and History. He was at one point a Methodist pastor, but I'm not going to. But he's done lots and lots of other wonderful things, and we came to know him through his CDs, but since then have also seen him in person. So it is truly a great honor and privilege to introduce to you Bil Lepp.
Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you. My name is Bil Lepp, and I am 5-time champion of the West Virginia Liars Contest. And I did serve 4 years as a United Methodist pastor. And the first year that I won the Liars Contest, a Presbyterian pastor won 2nd place, and another Methodist minister won 3rd place. So they did consider banning clergy as well after that. I then got a job working for the West Virginia Division of Culture and History, which runs the Liars Contest. Therefore, I could no longer enter the Liars Contest. But I think that does go to show you that if you lie well enough, long enough, eventually the government will hire you. Now, I was saying earlier to your pastor, people ask me all the time how you justify being a pastor and a liar. And my answer to that is always that, like half the disciples were fishermen. So I think that tells you, how Jesus thinks about liars. So anyway, I grew up in a little tiny town called Half Dollar, West Virginia. And we had 2 streets in Half Dollar. One was called Main Street. The other one was called, that ain't Main Street. And we had a little store that was kind of like a hardware store and a grocery store all kind of wrapped in one. It had a food court. We always thought it did, if you consider a crock pot with some hot dogs, a food court. And then about the only other thing we had in town, we had on one campus was the elementary school, the junior high, the high school, and then the jail. And many of us just went right on through. But then we had a Methodist church, and then we had your variety pack of Baptist churches. And our parents told us there were some Catholics that lived over the hill. But we didn't know if that was true, or if that was just something that they said so that we'd go to bed at night. But my buddy Skeeter and I love the Half Dollar Baptist Church. Now, when I say that we love the Baptist Church, I mean we love the building that was the Baptist Church, because we were Methodists. But the reason we loved the Baptist Church building was because the attic was infested with bats. And on a spring evening, a summer evening, a fall evening, you could go and sit behind the church and just watch thousands and thousands of bats flying out of the eaves and out of the steeple. It was a beautiful sight to see. So Skeeter and I were very excited when it was announced that because they were doing renovations at the Methodist Church, that we would be having a joint vacation Bible school at the Baptist Church. And we were excited for several reasons. One, we had lots of Baptist friends. But it was difficult to tell the Baptist children from the Methodist children on the playground because we all knew the same bad words. So we were excited to have the opportunity to see the Baptist children being Baptist in their natural Baptist habitat. On top of that, we had never been in the Baptist church, but we understood that in the Baptist church they had a baptismal, like a big bathtub where they did the baptisms. Now, when you're a Methodist, when you get baptized, you're generally an infant, and you just get a little bit of water sprinkled on your head. You don't even have anything to do with it, and there's no rebaptism in the Methodist church. But we understood that in the Baptist church, the Baptists got the full bore dunking. And I asked my dad why that was, and he said, that's because Methodists just have dirty minds. But the Baptists are dirty all over. And then, again, in the Methodist Church, there's no rebaptism, but we understood that there were Baptists who got baptized like once a week. So we were excited to have the opportunity to see that happen. So on the first day of the Vacation Bible School, we got to the sanctuary. The whole church wasn't much bigger than this sanctuary. And the little old ladies who were running the Vacation Bible School put the girls on one side of the sanctuary and the boys on the other. And we sang some hymns. And right away you could tell the difference between the Methodist and the Baptist kids because the Baptists knew the words. And we were looking for the hymnals. And then there was a devotional, and then it came time to give the offering. But instead of passing the plates in the traditional fashion, what happened was the boys lined up against this wall, the girls lined up against this wall, we progressed forward, and someone had built in front of the altar an offering-giving device, the likes of which I had never seen before, and I have never seen since. It was a 2x4, about this tall, and bolted loosely, perpendicularly across the top of it, was another 2x4. And on this side, tied on by binder's twine, was a coffee can painted blue. And on this side, tied on by binder's twine, was a coffee can painted pink. And the girls put their money in this can, and the boys put their money in this can, and whichever side went down, that gender won the offering. There's a lot wrong with that. And it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable. Now, it's not even all theological. Part of the problem is that the weight of American money has very little to do with the value of American money. A nickel is twice the size of a dime, but it's only worth half as much. 10 pennies weighs more than a $100 bill. Now, Skeeter and I, we knew that firsthand because that winter there'd been a blizzard. And we decided we need somebody. Okay, Paula's got it. Never mind. Somebody needed it. That winter, there'd been a blizzard. And Skeeter and I decided to go shovel snow to make a little bit of extra money. Now, first of all, I'm the last of 5 children. Second of all, I was born after the inventions of rubber and wool, but before the inventions of Thinsulate and Gore-Tex. I think most of you know what I'm talking about. And so, because I'm the last of 5 children, my winter boots were essentially thin rubber rain boots with metal clasps so that you could tighten them. And they were one size fits all, which means my oldest brother. So by the time they got to me, they had 4 siblings worth of holes worn through the soles and burned through the uppers. Now, as the last of 5 children, I did not own a new article of clothing until I was 27 years old. And the worst part about that was my 2 closest siblings in age were my sisters. And so I would say to my mother, I don't want to wear girls' pants. I don't want to wear a girl's shirt. And my mother would say, there's no such thing as girls' pants. There's no such thing as a girl's shirt. And I would say, then how come my shirt sticks out right here? And she would say, be quiet. There are children in Biafra. And so because my winter boots were ineffective and full of holes, to render them winterproof, my mother would sit me down, put 2 wool socks on each foot, and then she would take space-age, state-of-the-art, Arctic-rated Wonder Bread bags. And she would put 2 bread bags on each foot, and then work a rubber band up my calf, slap it shut like a garter so that the bags didn't fall down. Then she would put the boots on. But this made walking quite a process because my boots were too big, my feet were encased in plastic. So to walk, I would lift my foot, but it would take a second or 2 for my foot to fully engage the boot. And then I would lift the boot, move it forward, put it back down, and then my foot would have to re-engage the boot. So, thusly clad, Skeeter and I headed out. And my mother was like, goodbye, boys, go. Knock on strangers' doors. If they invite you in, by all means, enter their houses. If they offer you food and drink, say please and thank you. See you when you get home. or not. You're the last of 5. We might not notice. And so we headed out, and this went immediately from not just an exercise and occupation, but also sort of a sociology experiment, because we would knock on a door, and if the man of the house opened the door, we would say, "Can we shovel your driveway?" And he would say, "How much?" And we would say, $5, and he would say, "Have at it." But if the woman of the house opened the doorway, we would say, "Can we shovel your driveway?" And she would say, "Oh, no, my husband is going to do that." And she would shut the door, and we'd walk away, and about 30 seconds later, the door would open, and there would be the man of the house going, "Boys, boys, boys, come back, come back." So we learned that if the woman shut the door, we just stayed there on the stoop. 30 seconds later, the door opened, and there was the man of the house. But he wouldn't see us because we were only this tall, and he was looking down the street. And when he couldn't locate us, we would learn a new word. And then we would move, and that would startle him, and we would learn another new word. So by the end of the day, Skeeter and I both had $25, $30 cash money in our pockets. And the last house we went to was a little old lady, and when we were done, she invited us in, and she gave us cookies and cocoa, and then she paid us each $5. But she paid us in pennies. And we had to sit there, count out 500 pennies apiece. And the only vessel I had large enough to carry 500 pennies was a Wonder Bread bag. I needed my boot. And if you're curious as to how far you can get with 500 pennies in a Wonder Bread bag, about 100 yards, and then the bag just gives. So all of that to say, Skeeter and I were well aware that the weight of American money has very little to do with the value of American money. So back to the Vacation Bible School. What Skeeter and I wanted to do most was to get in the baptismal. And I don't know why, except that we were 7. And it seemed like the right sort of thing to do. So anytime the sanctuary was empty, anytime we could sneak away from class, we'd go. And first we would just look. I don't know exactly what we thought we were going to see. I guess we thought we were going to see Baptist sin, just sort of swimming around like evil koi, like, oh, there goes lust, there goes avarice. And then we would be just about to get in, and the Baptist pastor would materialize behind us. Now, it was a small town. We didn't go to that church, but we knew everybody. And he was this gruff old guy. I say he was old. Now I realize he was 30. But he had this wonderful attitude where he really did not care whether or not you agreed with him, because he knew that he was right. And that you would either one day come to see things his way, or you would go to hell. And he was fine with either outcome. And so he materialized behind us, and he said, "Boys, boys, boys, I know you want to get in there, but that's not a toy. And when a man does things purely for his own enjoyment, and not for the benefit of others or the glory of God, he will be tainted and stained that others may know." And we thought, wow, that's good stuff. It didn't make us not want to get in the baptism, but there was no denying it was good stuff. And that pastor hated the way we were doing the offering. But any pastor worth his or her salt knows that there's only so many arguments you can win. And taking on the little old ladies who run the Vacation Bible School, and I suspect some of you might be here, is not a wise career move. So he would not tell them to quit doing the offering like that. But by Thursday, he couldn't stand it anymore. And when it came time for the devotional, the preacher got up to do the devotional, but he didn't read a pithy little poem. No, he got up in the pulpit, and he gave a full-bore sermon. And he started by telling us the story about where Jesus is in the temple with the disciples, and they're watching people give the offering, and the rich guys are throwing in tons and tons of cash. And then the little old lady gets up, and she puts in her 2 mites or her 2 pennies. And Jesus turns to the disciples, and he says, who gave the greater offering? And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are like, where's my red pen? He's talking. And then, that's one of my favorite jokes that I have stolen. So Jesus says, who gave the greater offering? And one of the disciples gives one of those answers that make me think that the reason Jesus chose those 12 guys is because he knew that they were morons. And before you get angry or self-righteous, he knew that he could ask them questions that you and I needed to know the answers to, and they would say the first stupid thing that popped into their head, and then Jesus could explain the right answer, and you and I would know without having to open our mouths. So he was already looking out for you. So Jesus says, who gave the greater offering? And one of the disciples says, clearly the rich men gave the greater offering. And Jesus said, no, the rich men gave from their abundance, while the little old lady gave from her poverty. And then the pastor explained to us that what that meant is when you give an offering, you're supposed to put yourself in a place where you become dependent upon God. The word abundance means more than you need. So if you're giving out of your abundance, you haven't given anything at all. But the little old lady gave everything she had, therefore she became completely dependent upon God, thus she gave the greater offering. And just parenthetically, two quick things. One, that is in no way a prosperity verse. Two, I say this on behalf of the church treasurer, should you be here. If you are giving out of your abundance, don't quit. It's not doing you any good, but there are children in Biafra. And so the pastor told us that the rich men gave from their perfidy. Yeah, we didn't know what it meant either. But it seemed like a weird place to keep your money. And then he motioned at the scale, and he told us that if we continued to give in this perfidious way, that the demons of hell would descend upon us, snatch our souls, and drag them down to the sulfuric pits. And we were like, yeah! Because we were Methodists. Methodists don't have demons of hell. We have covered dish dinners. So we were moved, but again, not in the direction that the pastor had intended. It just caused Skeeter and I to remember the 1,000 pennies the little old lady had given us earlier that year. And so we went home that night and we collected every penny in both of our houses. And we didn't put them in a Wonder Bread bag. We got an old wool hunting sock. I bet we had 18 inches worth of pennies, probably 10 inches in diameter. And I'm talking pre-1984 pennies. I'm talking 174 pennies to the pound. And when we got to church the next day, Skeeter kept those pennies behind his back. You're probably familiar with the idea that even the observation of an experiment can change the outcome of the experiment. Well, the same is certainly true for a prank in church. And so when it came time to give the offering, Skeeter got last in line, and he held those pennies between his back and the wall, and he made his way forward. And when he got to the scale, Skeeter did not gently introduce the pennies into the blue can. He held that tube of pennies about 10 inches above the can, and he just dropped them. And when those pennies hit that blue can, that side of the scale dropped dramatically, causing the other side of the scale to rise precipitously. And when the blue can hit the ground, the scale stopped, but the pink can didn't. It was still going. And when it got to the end of the binder's twine, binding it to the 2x4, the binder's twine just ripped. And every eye in that sanctuary watched that pink can fly through the church, and it hit the ceiling. And when it hit the ceiling, it didn't stop. It punched a hole right through the ceiling. And we all stood there, staring. And then the demons of hell started to pour forth just thousands and thousands of bats just roiling out of the ceiling, and everyone ran for their lives. Everyone ran from the sanctuary, clutching their souls tightly to their chests, everyone but Skeeter and I, because we knew this was our moment, and we went straight toward the baptismal, and we didn't stop to look. We just put our hands on the sides and vaulted over. And when we had gone just far enough that we could no longer halt our forward progression, when we were now nothing but slaves to the laws of physics, Newton's first law, body in motion tends to stay in motion, which is very similar to Skeeter's first law, which is a body being chased by the law tends to stay in motion. But when all we could do is fly a little further forward and fall, we looked down and we saw that someone, some unknown person, had dyed the water red. And a few minutes later, when we joined the rest of the kids on the front lawn of the church, we were limping and dripping and dyed pink. And we heard a voice behind us that said, "Boys, boys, boys, when a man does things purely for his own enjoyment and not for the benefit of others or the glory of God, he will be tainted and stained that others may know." Thank you. So, my worst Christmas ever actually started the year before. I was 4 years old, and I noticed for the first time in my life that my dad had it was just a day or two after Christmas, I noticed my dad had a bald spot on the top of his head. And I said, "Dad, where'd you get that bald spot?" And he said, "Well, on Christmas Eve, I heard a noise on the roof. And I went outside, and just as I stepped out from underneath the carport, I felt something lick the back of my head. And I turned around and I looked, and there was Rudolph. And he had licked the hair right off the back of my head. And then Dad said to me, "The next time I see Rudolph, I am going to shoo him away." Well, now here's the thing. When you're 3, 4 years old, the world can be a very confusing place because you have a limited vocabulary. And everything you hear, you have to filter through the few words that you know and come up with something reasonable. Like when my youngest daughter, was 3 years old. She had finally got she had nailed her first shaky piton into the world of understanding time. And she finally figured out that not everything happens today. You know that old Eagles lyric, everything all the time? People think that's about cocaine. I think it's about being a toddler. But she had finally figured out that not everything happens at once. But the only other day that she could both understand and articulate was yesterday. So she would ask me questions like, "Are we going to Grandma's house today or yesterday?" And I would say, "Yesterday." And we would both be happy. Because I think I'm funny, and she thinks she's a Time Lord. And so, the world's a difficult place to understand. And so when Dad said, "I'm going to shoo Rudolph away," that was not an expression with which I was familiar. And so when I ran that through my limited vocabulary, what I came up with was, if I ever see Rudolph again, I am going to shoot him anyway. And I thought, oh dear, Dad is going to kill Rudolph. That could put a damper on next Christmas. And I worried about that for probably 4 days because I was 4. And then I forgot it. And I didn't think about it again until the holiday season rolled around. Now, when you're an adult and you're jaded and you have lost all hope, when you hear someone say the holiday season, you think, oh my, that incredibly stressful period of time between Thanksgiving and New Year. But when you are a child and there is still joy in the world, children know that the first holiday in the holiday season, probably the second most important holiday in the holiday season, is Halloween. Because that's the other day you get free stuff. And so, as Halloween started to roll around, I started to remember that my father had sworn this vendetta against Rudolph. And I wanted to know if Dad still intended to kill Rudolph. But I didn't want to remind him if he had forgotten. So I started to ask him a series of surreptitious questions. I said, Dad, do you own a gun? And he said, no, but I could get one. And I said, do you hunt? And he said, no, but sometimes at the barber, I read Field and Stream. And then I asked him a question that there is no way he could see through. I said, "Dad, is it even legal to kill a deer on your roof?" Now, I don't know what the urban deer population is like in the greater Clayton, California area, but in Half Dollar, West Virginia, yeah, if that deer is on your roof, that's your deer. And so I was very worried that Dad was going to kill Rudolph. And then we were just about to, in fact, just after Halloween, we had a national election. And just before that election, I heard my neighbor say, if Jimmy Carter gets elected president, the entire country is going to hell. And I was 5. I had a very narrow, very theological understanding of hell. And then Jimmy Carter did get elected president. And I thought the people in Canada and the people in Mexico were just going to pull out the pins. And the entire continental United States was just going to drop into the sulfuric pits. And then the only thing I had going for me is we had a teacher, our kindergarten teacher. She was from our little town of Half Dollar, but she had gone off to, I don't know, Harvard or Berkeley, and she'd gotten all full of liberal, and she'd come home. And this was right at the end of the hippie era. And she wasn't just a carrier, you know, she had it. And so she had come home and she decided she was going to expand our minds. And so in our kindergarten class, we were going to learn about world religions. Now, you might think that's a pretty heavy curricula for a bunch of 5-year-olds, but I assure you that there was going to be glue, glitter, and macaroni involved. So we were going to learn about Judaism and Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam. We were going to learn about everything. Like when we learned about Islam, we learned about Ramadan, where the Muslims fast for 40 days during daylight hours. And to understand what that felt like, one day we skipped snack. And then we knew. So her heart was in the right place. And we were going to make a menorah, and we were going to make a felt Santa Claus. And I was really looking forward to making that felt Santa Claus for several reasons. One, because it was I figured if I did a really good job on it, it would be like a positive talisman, like a positive voodoo doll, world religions. And if I did a really good job, Santa would sense that. And even if Dad did kill Rudolph, maybe Santa wouldn't visit the sins of the father on the son. And then it was a Christmas tree ornament. And I thought if I did a really good job, I could give it to my mom, and she would put it on the Christmas tree where the best ornaments go, which is, of course, the back of the Christmas tree. And about this time, I had some friends over at my house, and we were playing hide and seek. And I was looking for a place to hide. My older brother, Paul, was lying on the couch under a blanket. He had the measles. And I thought, I know where I'll hide. I will hide under the blanket of the measles victim. I thought, what idiot would look under the blanket? Never occurred to me what moron would. Well, nobody saw me. In fact, I didn't see anybody for about 2 weeks, except my mom and the doctor. And when I went back to school, they had made the Santa Clauses. Yeah, don't get too emotionally involved. A lot of this is made up. And I said to the teacher, can I make the Santa Claus? And she said, we've moved past that, but you can make the menorah. And I thought, I had the measles, not my bar mitzvah. And so Dad was going to kill Rudolph. Jimmy Carter was taking us down. I didn't get to make the Santa. And I went home, and I was feeling bad. Now, I am the last of 5 children. I don't know if you're the last of a long line of children, but if you are, you know that by then, your parents really just didn't care that much anymore. My mom was like, Paul, Kevin, Katie, Tammy, Deacon. Deacon was the dog before she got to my name. If I was going to get any sympathy, I had to lose a limb, and it not be my own fault. And so I went home, and I told Mom I didn't get to make the Santa Claus. And she said, whatever doesn't kill you will put hair on your chest. So then the only thing I had going for me is Mom told me that someone in the church had given her tickets, us tickets, to go to the Charleston Symphony Hall. And you might be wondering why a 5-year-old boy was excited to go to the Charleston Symphony Hall. Well, it's what my mother said we were going to see. She said we were going to see Elephant Gerald. Now, when I was 5, I loved elephants. I mean, I had elephant knickknacks, I had elephant bed sheets. My favorite book was Babar. I didn't know who Elephant Gerald was, but what I did know was this. If you're an elephant and you have a name, you have to be important. How many elephants can you name, right? There's Babar, Dumbo, Jumbo, and Horton. That's about it. So an elephant with a name is an important elephant. Then, Mom said that Elephant Gerald was a musician and had played with Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong. I didn't really know who those people were either. But I knew that you had to be pretty important to play with a count, a duke, and the first man on the moon. And then I thought, how do elephants even play music? Do they hold their trunk out like a trumpet and they play it? Or they hold it out to the side and another elephant plays it like a flute? Or they curl it and it's a saxophone? I didn't know much about music at this point in my life. You have to understand, I thought trombone players were the most amazing musicians in the world because I didn't understand the mechanics of the instrument, and I thought this big long pole just went down their throat every time they went like that. But then I thought, maybe, this was my best idea. Maybe the elephant comes out in a kilt, and it takes its own trunk and puts it in its own mouth, and it inflates itself, and then it squeezes, and music comes out. So the day of the concert came, and my mother told me to go and get dressed, and I went downstairs, and she had laid out an outfit for me, but I didn't want to wear what she had laid out because I had a three-piece suit. And not only did I have a three-piece suit, but I had assembled it myself. Because I knew that to have a three-piece suit, you had to have a pair of pants, a vest, and a jacket all made out of the same material. And so I had grown up wearing blue jeans, I had a denim jacket, and I had recently acquired a denim vest. So I thought I had a three-piece suit. And I went upstairs, and my mother said, no! And then I later learned that that is also called a Canadian tuxedo. So I went down, and I put on what she had laid out, and we got in the car, and we went to the Symphony Hall. I'd never been there before. It was beautiful. And there were women in evening gowns and men in real tuxedos. And we went in, and we sat down, and the lights dimmed, and the curtains opened, and what I assumed was the opening act came out on stage. It was a Rubenesque African-American middle-aged woman, and she sang a song about a knife named Mac. And when she was done, I turned to my mother and I said, where's the elephant? And she said, shh. And then the lady sang, I don't know, a couple more songs. And I was like, where's the elephant? All the time I was getting more insistent. And then she sang Tisket a Tasket. And then she sang Sleigh Bells. And then she left the stage and the curtains shut and the lights came on and flowers came out. We were in the car and we were on the way home and I was in the back seat crying the way that only a small child can cry. I wanted to see the elephant. And my parents were like, what is wrong with you? I wanted to see the elephant. And my parents were like, what elephant? And I said, Elephant Gerald. And they just burst out laughing, the way that adults do. When a child totally misunderstands the world. My wife back here, she is from Yazoo County, Mississippi. That is the heart of the Delta. Yazoo County is as flat as this floor for as far as you can see. And so when she was little, her parents decided to take her and her sister to the Great Smoky Mountains to see what not flat looked like. And they were going up the Smokies, and my mother-in-law, you understand we weren't married then, but it's just the easiest way to describe it. My mother-in-law said, my ears just popped. And my sister-in-law said, my ears just popped. And my wife, who was chewing gum, said, my ears have not popped. What will happen if my ears don't pop? And her father said, your head will explode. And 5 minutes later, she was hysterical in the back seat. So, Dad was going to kill Rudolph. Jimmy Carter was taking us down. I didn't get to make the Santa Claus. There was no elephant. And then we had to go visit Aunt Lenore. Now, I don't know if you have an Aunt Lenore, She wasn't really my aunt. She was just this woman that my grandmother had met, and Aunt Lenore didn't have any family of her own, and she had adopted all of my grandmother's grandchildren as her own, and every year she would make each of us she would knit us slippers. But I was about 7 before I knew that they were slippers, because they weren't foot-shaped. They were football-shaped, and the hole was in the middle. And I don't know anybody that has foot in front of the hole and foot behind the hole, except Charlie Brown characters, and I know Schultz is from around here, so no offense, I'm just saying. I didn't know anybody. And then on top of that, Aunt Lenore was legally blind, and I think the ladies at the yarn store took advantage of her. She would go in and say, "Can I have red and green?" And they'd be like, "Here you go, Miss Lenore," but it would be puke and vomit. And so every Christmas we had to go see Aunt Lenore, and you know how it is. You knock on the door and you're like, "Merry Christmas," but the subtext is, if we liked you, we'd visit more often. And then you had to hug Aunt Lenore. And well, first of all, Aunt Lenore had that particular old lady smell, not the general old lady smell. Most old ladies smell like lilacs, but Aunt Lenore had that particular old lady smell that was equal parts mothballs and cat urine. And then you had to hug Aunt Lenore. And hugging Aunt Lenore was like hugging an old Christmas tree, because chances are you were going to get poked. You were going to come away sticky, and if you weren't careful, you'd break off a limb. And finally, it was about 3 days before Christmas. I was in my house. I was all alone. Everyone else had left. I was 5. It wasn't neglect. It was the 70s. And when you're the last of a long line of children, no one gets tired of telling you you're everyone's responsibility, which is code for you're no one's responsibility. Everybody thought that everybody else was teaching me things. So I was 17 before I knew the difference between my shoulder and my elbow. And so sometimes I just found myself alone. And I went in the living room, and there was the Christmas tree, and there were some presents under it, and some of them were for me, and I thought, we might not even make it to Christmas. I might as well open them up and see what they are. And so I did, and then I rewrapped them. Now, my mother is a meticulous wrapper, and that is in no way a hip-hop reference, but I wrapped them the best I could and put them back under the tree. And finally, it was Christmas Eve. And I was in my bed, and I had warring emotions. I was excited, and I was anxious. I was excited because we were almost there. Just a couple more hours, and it would be Christmas. But I was anxious because there were a couple of more hours. Who knew what could happen in that time? Dad could kill Rudolph. Jimmy Carter could take us down. And so I was laying in bed with those two warring emotions. When I don't know if I heard it, or if I dreamt it, or if I imagined it. But the screen door went foom foom, and then I heard blam. And I thought, oh no, he killed Rudolph. And then I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up. And that's evidence that you fell asleep, right? What? I'm driving. And so, in our family, I don't know how it happened in your family, but in our family, not Jesus, Santa, same holiday, different guy. Santa did not leave your stockings hung by the chimney with care. Santa would bring your stockings in and lay them beside you on your bed. It wasn't so anybody could sleep for 10 more minutes. And so we would wake up, and there would be our stockings. And every year, we got the same thing in our stockings. My Großpapa, that's my grandfather, it's German for great father. It has nothing to do with his personal hygiene. Großpapa, my parents, and Santa Claus all worked in conjunction to fill our stockings. So every year we got the same thing. From my parents, we got an orange and a walnut, because they had lived through the Depression, and they wanted us to know how miserable their Christmases had been. And then from Großpapa, throughout the course of the year, he saved all of his prescription pill bottles. And he would put coins in them, and then each grandchild got one prescription coin bottle full, or one prescription pill bottle full of coins. But Großpapa was not interested in fair pay. You got the coin that fit the diameter of the bottle. So one kid was going to get $1.20 in dimes, and one kid was going to get $20 in Eisenhower dollars. Großpapa didn't care as long as everybody got a bottle of coins. And he didn't wash the pill bottles, So about halfway through Christmas, your mother would be like, "Take that dime out of your mouth." And you'd be like, "But it feels so good." And then from Santa, each of my siblings and I, we got 2 packets of flavored Quaker oatmeal. We did not know that flavored Quaker oatmeal existed outside of Christmas, and I don't know why, because it's not any more expensive. But on Christmas morning, each of us got 1 pack of maple and brown sugar and 1 pack of apple and cinnamons, and that was our Christmas breakfast. And so I awoke that morning. Now, I wet the bed until I was 11. Not continuously. I got some other things done. But that night, I had wet the bed. And when I awoke, my oatmeal had already begun. And that was awful, because it was Christmas. And that meant when nobody was looking, I was going to have to switch that with one of my siblings' oatmeal. And then I went up, and we opened the presents. And some of them weren't what they were supposed to be. And I know they weren't what they were supposed to be because I'd opened them 3 days before. One was supposed to be a basketball, and now it was just a pillow taped up with duct tape. And another one, I may have given myself away when I said, "This is not supposed to be a 12-ounce can of mixed vegetables." And then I had to learn a very valuable lesson. And let's face it, Christmas is no day to learn a very valuable lesson. And so that night, as I lay in bed, I know what I wasn't thinking. I wasn't thinking, sure, this was a bad Christmas, but I bet a lot of people's best Christmas isn't as bad as my bad Christmas. And that I should be thankful that I have teachers who are willing to expand my horizons, and that I have family members who are willing to include people like Aunt Lenore, marginalized people, people on the edge of society, so that they feel included and have a family of their own and feel loved. And that I have parents who love me when they remember me, and that I have a nice, safe, warm bed to pee in. I wasn't thinking that because I was 5. And I know what I wish I was thinking, but there's no way I could have articulated this because I was 5. I wish that I had been thinking, almost all of these problems occurred because I misunderstood something. And I bet 95% of the problems in the world occur because we misunderstand things. And a lot of times, and it's just getting worse, we deliberately misunderstand each other. We see people coming toward us and we think to ourselves, I don't like the color of their skin, I don't like how they vote, I don't like who they love, I don't like how they identify, I don't like who they worship, I don't care what that person says, I'm not going to listen to them. And I bet that if we took, I'm going to say 10 minutes out of our day to listen to other people, not to like, but to try and understand at least where they were coming from, I bet we could solve 80% of the problems in the world. But I wasn't thinking that because I was 5. What I was thinking was, this is the worst Christmas ever. The end. So when I was in college, during summers, I worked at a series of camps. And one of the camps I worked at was a camp called Camp Horseshoe. And it was me and my buddy Skeeter and our friend Wally and then our buddy Uncle Debo. Now, Uncle Debo was not our uncle. In fact, Uncle Debo was a year younger than we were. But everybody in town called him Uncle Debo because Uncle Debo was the last and quite unexpected of 17 children. And when Uncle Debo was born, his parents were tired, and they could not think of a name. All of Uncle Debo's siblings had perfectly normal names like Placemat and Holster. But they just couldn't come up with anything for Debo, so they thought, we'll just call him the boy until something better comes along. And then through the wonders of time and syllabic manipulation, the boy became da boy, which eventually became Debo. And then we called him Uncle because as the last of 17 children, Uncle Debo had nieces and nephews who were quite a bit older than he was. So it wasn't uncommon to be walking down Main Street and hear some matronly niece yell out, call out, Uncle Debo, you pull your pants up right now, or I'm going to tell Grandma. So everybody in town just called the poor kid Uncle Debo. So the four of us worked in this one cabin. And this cabin was maybe half again as wide as this sanctuary is. You came in the front door, there was a foyer, and then there was a door on either side of the foyer, and on each side of the foyer there was a wing. And in each one of those wings there were probably 25 bunk beds. If you went straight through the foyer, there was another area that maybe was a quarter the size of this area up here. And the door in the middle. On this side, there was a bunk. Skeeter slept on the bottom bunk over here. I slept on the top bunk. Wally slept on the bottom bunk over here. Uncle Debo slept on the top bunk. And if you passed through that room, there was a screen door, so the four of us counselors could come in and out of the cabin without bothering everybody else. Well, one day, Wally cut his finger, and he cut it bad enough that we had to take him over the mountain to get stitches. Now, this camp was just outside of St. George, West Virginia, which is just outside of Parsons, if that clears it up for you. So anyway, it was a long way to the doctor. And when we brought him back, he had stitches, and Wally was on painkillers, and we were helping him up the back stairs into the cabin. Now, we weren't really helping him because he was on painkillers, and the steps were uneven, and we were 19. And we thought it was fun to watch him try and negotiate the stairs. Well, he fell. And he knew that this hand was damaged, so he put it behind his back. And he reached out to stop his fall with this hand, and these two fingers bent all the way back. I know. It is neat to see happen to somebody else. Because you're like, oh, can the human body do that? And then you're like, no, not successfully. So we had to take him back over the mountain. And this time they put him in a splint, and they put him on more painkillers. So this time we helped him up the back steps, because it was almost supper, and we didn't want to miss that. And we got him in bed, and me and Skeet and Wally took the kids, did everything, got them in bed, got ourselves in bed, and I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I heard Skeet whispering from underneath me. He said, Bill, wake up, but don't move. Now, I don't know if you've ever been awoken in that fashion, but that is a difficult fashion in which to be awoken, because you know you're going to die. And so your body fills with adrenaline, and you want to go, wah! But you know if you go, wah, you're going to die. So I brought myself slowly to consciousness, and I said, what's the matter? And Skeeter said, there's a skunk in the cabin. And I looked over the edge, and sure enough, there was a skunk milling around. And Skeeter said, close the door. And I knew what he meant. We had that door that went out into the main part of the cabin. We left that open at night so that we could hear what noises the children were making that we were going to ignore. And Skeeter was afraid if the skunk went out there, it was going to go in one of those wings. One of the kids was going to see it. That kid was going to scream, and the skunk was going to go off. But I was thinking to myself, out there is 100 14-year-old boys who haven't bathed in a week. I thought, how much worse can it smell? You know, I thought we had to take that skunk and hang it like an air freshener. But then I remembered that we were contractually obligated to look after the goodwill of those children. And so I leaned forward and I shut the door, and it shut with a snick, and it didn't seem to bother the skunk at all. But somewhere in this process, Uncle Debo had awoken. And Uncle Debo said, there's a skunk in the cabin? And Skeeter said, yes. And Uncle Debo said, will it bite? That's the wrong question. If a bear comes in, you don't think, does it stink? You know, if a mountain lion comes in, you're not worried about ticks. And so I started to chuckle just quietly, but Skeeter said, yes, it will bite. And Uncle Devo said, how did it get in here? And as if to answer that question, the screen door went, and a second skunk came in. So now there were 2 skunks milling around. And Uncle Devo said, if one of them bites me, will the other? And I thought, what do they have, a collective consciousness? You know, what are they, the Borg? And Skeeter said, yes. He said they're like hornets. And if you make one mad, you make them all mad. And by this time, I was laughing. But again, it was that quiet laugh like you do in church or at school or at a funeral. But I was definitely laughing. And Skeeter was laughing. Our bed was rocking at like a 0.8 on the Richter scale. But, you know, we were trying to contain ourselves. And finally, Skeeter got a hold of himself. And he said to me, Bill, did you brush your teeth? And I thought I knew where he was going with this, so I said no. And Uncle Devo said, I brushed my teeth. Why does that matter? And Skeeter said, because skunks are scavengers, and they're attracted to scents. And if they smell a scent that they're attracted to, they will come and investigate. And Uncle Devo said, I'll be okay. I'm on the top bunk. And Skeeter said, why do you think people call skunks polecats? And Uncle Devo inhaled like he never intended to exhale again. Not like he was trying to kill himself, just like he wasn't going to breathe for the next 70 years. He just kind of went, ah, like that. And by this time, I mean, Skeet and I, we had tears coming out of our eyes and going in our ears. And somewhere in the midst of this, the screen door went, and a third skunk came in. So now there were 3 skunks milling around. Yeah, we were going to die, but we were laughing. We were taunting, but let our tombstone say they went down taunting. And then, in the midst of all this, Wally, who had been, you know, on his painkillers. Now, Wally was a great camp counselor, and we were a great pair, because Wally was one of those people that think it's neat to get up early and watch the sun rise. I was 28 before I knew the sun rose. So we were great, because he was good in the morning, I was good at night, but he was one of those people that wake up happy, you know, singing. He wakes up and goes, good morning, and jumps out of bed singing a song about birdies in trees going chirpity chirp, chirp, chirp. So in the midst of this, Wally awoke. And in his drug-addled state, he thought it was morning. And he jumped out of bed. And he said, good morning. And he landed in the center of a triangle of skunks. And with all the innocence of a drunk, he looked down and he said, kitty cats. And he knelt down. And he reached down. And he started to scratch one of the skunks behind the ears. And the skunk didn't know what was happening. But it wasn't entirely unpleasant. So the skunk came closer. And Wally picked him up. And he stood up. And he turned to Uncle Devo. And he said, look, Uncle Devo, a kitty cat. And the skunk crawled off of Wally's hands and onto Uncle Devo's chest. And Uncle Devo sat up. And he screamed. And the skunk bit him. And then all 3 skunks just went off. And Skeeter and I were laying there, coughing, gagging, choking, laughing. When we heard a voice from off in the ether that said, boys, boys, boys. When a man does things purely for his own enjoyment and not for the benefit of others or the glory of God, he will be stained and tainted that others may know. Thank you very much. I got one more for you, and it's kind of a bedtime story, so it's a good one to send you away from. On when my oldest child was about 5.
Bill, do you want to wait for me?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot.
Okay, that's
Yeah, right.
okay. So, we only charge you guys $10 a ticket, and this is what he does for a living. So I'm also going to pass the baskets and ask if you would, make a Goodwill donation as you're able to
Do you not have a
support him.
scale?
Yeah, I do see one is basket and one's a plate, and we'll see. Yeah. So, Janie, and while we're passing it, then you can tell your last story.
Oh, so I got to
So
watch,
thanks.
huh? I'm looking at you. So, when my oldest child was about 5 years old, she said, let's play Kingdoms. My oldest child was prone to inventing games. And I don't know if you had a child like this, but when she invented games, she invented them in such a way that only one person could win. And that was her. And so she said, let's play Kingdoms. And I said, okay. So she said, I'll get the stuff from my kingdom. And she got the Tonka truck, dump truck, and the Tonka truck, fire truck, and the jumbo jet, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And she said, I will be the king of big things. And I said, okay, what do I get to be the king of? And she gave me a marble and a jack. And she said, you can be the king of little things. And I said, oh, that's a great idea for a story. I'm going to my office. You play by yourself, Cats in the Cradle. And so I went down to my office and I wrote this story. And I wrote it to say it out loud, because again, this is my full-time job. I say things out loud. And so I was telling the story, and a friend of mine said, would you like that to be a children's book? And I said, of course I'd like that to be a children's book. And she said, it's probably, 1,500, maybe 2,000 words long. She said, we're going to have to edit it a little bit. And I said, jokingly, I don't care as long as there's 3 words left by Bil Lepp. Which I thought was really funny, until after 7 years of editing, we had edited the book down to 750 words. So it's available out there. I don't even know why I brought it up, except that it's available out there on the table. It's called The King of Little Things. And so I'm going to tell you the oral version, which is a little bit different than the written version. And if you want to explore, if you want to compare and contrast, and I'll make it sound intelligent, then you can purchase a copy of the written version. You can talk about it with your friends. So anyway, long ago, far away, on the other side of the mountain, there was a king. He was the king of little things. He was the king of keys, coins, crumbs, and condensation. He was the king of needles, noodles, knots, beetles, baby rattles, little ballerina dolls, toy soldiers, paper clips, pin cushions, pet names, and small kindnesses. Now, all around the king of little things, there were bigger kings. There were kings of cities, kings of counties, kings of countries, and kings of continents. The big kings all had aspirations. The kings, oh wait, I forgot a line. The big kings made their subjects pay for everything, for freedom, for food, for firewood. The king of little things gave anything to anyone who asked politely. Now the big kings all had aspirations. The kings of cities wanted to be kings of counties. The kings of counties wanted to be kings of countries. The kings of countries wanted to be kings of continents. And the kings of continents wanted to rule the world. The king of little things just wanted to remember his wife's birthday. Which is not a line that made it into the children's book. And so, one day, one of the big kings decided it was time to take over the world. His name was King Normus. And he got together his generals, he got together his advisors, he amassed his armies, and they set out, and they crushed the kings of the cities, they quashed the kings of the counties, they conquered the kings of the countries, they alliterated the kings of the continents. And when King Normus thought that he had taken over the entire world, he had his jewelers make him a huge crown with thousands of tiny jewels. And he had his tailors make him a fine suit with big brass buttons. He threw a huge banquet. He stood in front of everyone. He said, I am now the biggest king that ever was. I am the king of the sky. I am the king of the mountains. I am the king of the rivers. I am the king of the trees. I am the king of the oceans. I am the king of the whales. I am the king of the pachyderms. And he would have gone on like that forever, except a servant in the back of the room raised a tremulous hand. And he said, excuse me, my enormous sire, you are indeed the king of the sky and the king of the pachyderms. But I am afraid that there is one king whom you have overlooked in your quest to conquer the world. And King Normus said, who, which, what king have I overlooked in my quest to conquer the world? And the servant said, sir, you've overlooked his minuscule majesty, the king of little things. Well, this sent King Normus into a rage. He said, king of little things, king of little things. Little things don't have a king. He said, everybody knows the little things exist simply to serve the bigger things. But still in all, he amassed his armies and he set out to conquer the king of little things. And they got to the king of little things' cabin in the evening. And the king of little things was in the kitchen doing the dishes, because he knew that it was the little things that matter the most. He also knew, as David Holt says, that no man has ever been willingly shot in the back while doing the dishes. Right? Let him finish. And that is also not in the book. So the king of little things looked out the window. He knew that these soldiers would attack in the morning, so he went out on his front porch and he respectfully asked some of his subjects if during the night they would invade the big king's camp. And when the big king's soldiers awoke, they couldn't attack. Chiggers and ticks and mosquitoes had gotten underneath their armor. Athletes' foot fungus had crawled down their boots and in between their toes. There were worms in the meat, weevils in the wheat, flies in the fruit. Termites had eaten away the arrow shafts, the spear shafts, the cannon wheels, and the catapult. And King Normus was so upset, he requisitioned new equipment: arrows with steel shafts, spears with steel shafts, steel wheels on the cannon, a steel catapult. King of Little Things asked his friend Rust to ride his friend Dew into the big king's camp. And once again, when the big king's soldiers awoke, they couldn't attack. Rust had eaten through the armor. It had eaten away the arrow shafts. The cannons wouldn't roll. The catapult was now about as dangerous as a cantaloupe. And King Normus was in his enormous tent marching back and forth. How can I defeat this king? I can't defeat this king. He controls the little things to create chaos. And then he had an idea. He said, I know what I'll do. He said, I'll cheat. He said, I'll lie. Because the king of little things is not the king of lies. Because a lie, no matter how small, is never a little thing. He said, send a soldier with a flag of truce. Tell him to get the king of little things to come to my tent to discuss the situation of the siege. And when he gets here, we'll capture him and we'll throw him in the dungeon. Well, they sent a soldier. And the king of little things knew what was happening, but he came along because he knew his subjects would come to his aid if need be. And as soon as the king of little things walked into King Normus's tent, all of the little things in the tent recognized their king. The coins rolled out of King Normus's coffers and bowed down before the king of little things. The jewels jumped out of King Normus's crown. The fillings fell out of his teeth. The buttons jumped off of his coat. His suspenders surrendered. His belt broke, and his pants fell down. Yeah, if you were fourth graders, you'd be laughing. And so there stood King Normus, trying to hold up both his pants and his pride. And he was so upset, he said, throw him in the dungeon, throw him in the dungeon. But when they got to the dungeon, all of the little things recognized their king. The keys refused to unlock the locks. The locks refused to unlock. The nails jumped out of the doors and bowed down before the king of little things. King Normus said, put him in a cave. Put him in a cave, put a big rock in front of the cave. No food, no water till he surrenders his kingdom. Well, the king of little things went to the cave, and life wasn't entirely unpleasant in the cave. The ants brought him crumbs, the bees brought him honey, the birds brought him seeds. Little drops of water made their way down through the mountain and dripped into his mouth. But after a while, King of little things missed his queen. He missed his cottage. And so he sent word with the ants and the birds and the bees, asking them to ask the little things everywhere to do him a favor. And the ants carried the words like crumbs, the bees painted the words on the flowers, the birds dropped the words from the sky like rain, and all over the world, little things began to happen. Springs sprung, strings strung, hangers unhung, easels eased away, tables toppled, chairs folded, quilts quivered, quills quit, bolts bolted, brakes jolted, fires froze, pickles undilled. Boats listed, words twisted, cookies crumbled, bread broke, ticks and tocks left their clocks. And everybody, well, everything everywhere quit working, and everybody knew that it was King Normus's fault. And they demanded that the King of Little Things be set free. Well, King Normus could see that he was beat, so he surrendered his crown, and he had loaded some of his enormous possessions onto his enormous wagon, and off he rode. And the people presented the crown to the King of Little Things, who asked very little of his new subjects, except that they plant flowers for the birds and the bees, leave crumbs for the ants, oil hinges regularly, tip generously, and say please and thank you. And everyone lived adequately ever after. Except, of course, King Normus, who could never find his watch or his wallet or his comb. And maybe even he will someday learn that it's the little things that matter the most. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you again. I appreciate you guys all coming out. We're just kind of making a little tour on our way to Lodi. That's the big exclamation point in this tour. No, they're very generous. I'm going up to do a library fundraiser for them, so I appreciate you guys coming out to see me. As was mentioned, if you haven't had enough of me, I did do an 8-episode series on the History Channel called Man vs. History for a while, just for like one day. We were trending number 3 on Hulu, second to Mel Brooks's History of the World Part 2. So I did feel pretty good about that. I didn't make any money, but there we were. So it's a fun show that we shot during COVID, going around and looking at the stories behind the history that you think you know. You should be able to find that on the internet just by typing in Man versus History. And then again, this is my full-time job. I go into elementary schools, junior highs, high schools, churches, spaghetti dinners, Cub Scout blue and gold banquets, corporate events, social events, festivals, fairs. What it boils down to is if you need a speaker and you have some money, I'm your guy. So thank you very much. I have some merchandise outside. Hope to see you somewhere else. Thank you. Thank you.